The sirens had long since faded, leaving behind the stark, pulsing glow of emergency lights against the pre-dawn gloom. I stepped out of my unmarked sedan, the chill October air biting at my exposed skin. The university campus, usually a hive of early morning activity, was a tableau of controlled chaos, uniformed officers directing traffic, an ambulance crew huddled by their vehicle, their services rendered unnecessary. The scent of ozone and burnt electronics hung heavy, a metallic tang that promised devastation. Reed. Glad you're here. The lead detective, a man whose face was etched with a permanent skepticism, met me halfway to the shattered building entrance. He gestured vaguely at the mangled facade of the research wing. Dr. Aris Thorne's lab. High security, cutting-edge bioengineering. Or was Dot? I nodded, my gaze already sweeping the scene, absorbing the shattered glass, the buckled steel frames, the scorch marks crawling up the concrete. Initial assessment? Looks like an internal detonation. Containment breach, catastrophic failure. The fire suppression system kicked in eventually, but not before. Well, you'll see. The detective paused, his voice dropping. Thorne was inside. Not much left. He paused again, then added, almost as an afterthought, could be a suicide. He was working on some pretty heavy stuff, apparently. Brilliant, but a recluse. Pressure cooker environment. I offered no immediate response, my mind already cataloging the visual data, filing away the detective's assumptions. Suicide or accident? The two easy answers. My job was to find the truth, no matter how inconvenient. Inside, the air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt polymers and something else, something organic and faintly sweet, like overripe fruit left in the sun. The lab was a maelstrom of twisted metal, pulverized glass, and scattered electronics. Precision instruments, once gleaming examples of technological prowess, were now fused, melted sculptures of modern wreckage. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light penetrating the shattered ceiling, illuminating the destruction in a macabre ballet. My boots crunched over debris, each step a small violation of the pristine disaster. Bodies here, a forensic technician indicated, pointing to a section near what used to be a reinforced containment station. Thorne. What remained of him was a gruesome testament to the blast's force. His form was barely discernible amidst the wreckage, a dark, flattened shape against the charred floor. The explosion had been immense, thorough. Every detail, from the radiating scorch patterns to the splintered work surfaces, screamed accident. The technician's assessment of a catastrophic internal detonation seemed entirely plausible. The detective's theory of suicide, perhaps a desperate act involving his own volatile research, also fit the immediate narrative. I knelt, ignoring the lingering heat, pulling out my magnification loupe and a small LED penlight. My eyes scanned the immediate vicinity of Thorne's remains, then widened their scope to the epicenter of the blast. This wasn't just a lab, it was a fortress of scientific inquiry, equipped with multiple redundancies, advanced failsafes, and environmental controls designed to prevent exactly this kind of disaster. For it to fail so spectacularly, something fundamental must have given way. My gaze settled on a section of what had been a primary containment vessel, a thick-walled cylinder constructed from a specialized, high-tensile alloy. It was warped and torn, but a particular stress fracture caught my eye. Most of the ruptures were outward, consistent with an internal pressure explosion. But this one, a hairline crack spiderwebbing across a critical seam, showed a distinct shear point, almost as if it had been forced to fail inwards before the main blast tore everything apart. And around that microfracture, the burn pattern was different, a localized charring, distinct from the broader, more diffuse heat damage that engulfed the rest of the lab. It was a pinpoint application of energy, concentrated, precise, not the chaotic signature of a spontaneous explosion. My breath hitched, a silent, internal alarm. The primary blast would have easily masked it, if one wasn't looking for precisely this kind of anomaly. This wasn't a system failure, it was a guided failure. I stood slowly, my gaze sweeping the room again, seeing it with new eyes. The detective and the technician were still discussing the probable cause, their voices muffled by the sheer scale of the wreckage. They saw a tragic accident. I saw a meticulous deception. My eyes drifted towards a corner, miraculously less damaged, where a series of specialized biological waste containers stood upright, their integrity surprisingly intact. They were designed for extreme conditions, but their survival here seemed almost too convenient. One particular container, a high-capacity unit, had a faded, yet still legible, label University Medical School Cadaver Storage Facility, Specimen Lot 734B. Thorne hadn't just been working on theoretical bioengineering, he'd been working with human-derived materials, accessing resources from the deepest recesses of the university's research infrastructure. The sheer gravity of his work, the ethical complexities, the corporate secrets that would inevitably surround such groundbreaking research, it all suddenly coalesced. This wasn't a simple accident, nor a desperate act of self-destruction. And the person responsible knew Thorne's lab, and perhaps his work, intimately. The tension in the air, once merely a product of the disaster, now felt personal, a tightening band around my chest. This investigation had just begun, and already, I knew it would be anything but straightforward. It clung to my coat, seeping into my skin despite the insulated layers. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, persistent drone, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on the stainless steel surfaces. I watched as the examiner, a meticulous woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper scalpel, began her work. Thorne lay on the table, a stark figure under the bright lights. The initial report had painted a picture of a devastating lab accident, catastrophic burns, internal trauma consistent with a powerful concussive force. And at first glance, the examiner's preliminary findings seemed to corroborate it. She pointed out the extensive charring, the fractured ribs, the internal hemorrhaging. Her voice was flat, professional, reciting a litany of injuries that should have been enough to close the case. But I wasn't there for the obvious. My gaze lingered on the edges of the burns, the way the tissue had reacted. There was a peculiar asymmetry, a subtle variation in depth and spread that nodded me. A powerful explosion, yes, but the pattern felt directed, somehow. Not a chaotic, all-encompassing blast, but something focused. And then I saw it. A faint shimmer, almost imperceptible, caught in the fine hairs on the back of Thorne's left hand, near the wrist. It wasn't ash, nor was it a fragment of lab glass. It was a cluster of minute, crystalline particles, glinting under the intense light. They were too uniform, too iridescent to be a byproduct of a typical lab explosion. She retrieved a pair of fine tweezers, carefully plucking a few of the particles and placing them onto a sterile slide. Under the facility's microscope, they resolved into intricate, almost alien geometries, reflecting light with an unnatural brilliance. Not a trace of carbon, no organic residue. This wasn't from Thorne's lab. It wasn't even a common industrial compound. It was something else entirely. "I need these analyzed immediately," I stated, the determination in my voice undeniable. "Full spectroscopic analysis. Every element, every isotope." My suspicion solidified. This wasn't an accident. This was a cover-up, and whoever orchestrated it had made a mistake, leaving behind a signature. A signature that would lead me away from the lab and into something far more intricate. The university campus felt strangely alive, a stark contrast to the death I'd just witnessed. My first stop was the office of the rival scientist, a man named Silas Vance. His name had surfaced repeatedly in the preliminary background checks, a brilliant mind in a similar field, but one perpetually overshadowed by Thorne's more radical, secretive breakthroughs. The rival scientist's office was a monument to academic achievement, shelves crammed with awards and thick, leather-bound journals. He sat behind a gleaming mahogany desk, his posture stiff, his eyes sharp and assessing as I introduced myself. "A tragedy, of course," he began, his voice a low rumble. "Thorne was singular. A genius, no doubt, but reckless. Always pushing boundaries, ethical and otherwise. You two had a professional rivalry, I understand?" I prompted, watching his hands, which were clasped tightly on the desk. "Rivalry implies a contest of equals." He scoffed, a flicker of something that looked like resentment in his eyes. Thorne operated in his own sphere, a hermetically sealed world of his own making. He hoarded his research, his discoveries. Refused to collaborate, even when it would have advanced the field exponentially. "Did you ever try to access his research?" He paused, a beat too long. "There were discussions. Formal requests. All rebuffed. He believed his work was too sensitive for peer review, too groundbreaking to be shared prematurely. A fatal flaw, perhaps." The rival scientist's words were carefully chosen, but the underlying current of bitterness was palpable. He spoke of Thorne's isolation as a flaw, but I sensed a frustrated hunger for what Thorne possessed. He had motive, a clear professional one, and perhaps a personal one, born of envy. I thanked him and left, his carefully constructed composure unraveling slightly in my wake. My next interview was with the former assistant, Maya. She'd been dismissed by Thorne 6 months prior, the official reason cited as irreconcilable differences in research methodology. Her office, a cramped space in a less prestigious wing, was cluttered with stacks of papers and half-empty coffee cups. He had a weary look, but her eyes held a spark of defiance. "Thorne was impossible," she said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "He was a tyrant. Demanding, dismissive, and utterly paranoid about his work. He'd accuse me of trying to steal his ideas if I even looked at a new protocol too long." "Why did you leave?" I asked. "He fired me. Said I lacked the vision for his pivotal research. The truth is, I questioned his methods. Some of his materials. They were ethically dubious, even for a bioengineer. I raised concerns, and he saw it as disloyalty." "What kind of materials?" She hesitated, glancing around as if the walls had ears. "Human-derived. Not just tissue cultures, I mean. More. He had access to things through the university's deeper channels. Things I wasn't comfortable with. He was obsessed with pushing the boundaries, no matter the cost. Her motive was clear: resentment, a desire for vindication, and perhaps even a twisted sense of justice for what she perceived as Thorne's ethical transgressions. He had intimate knowledge of his lab, his work, and his secrets. As I walked away from the interview, the pieces began to shift, forming a more sinister mosaic than any accidental explosion. Thorne's death wasn't a tragic miscalculation. It was a meticulously planned act, designed to look like one. And those crystalline shards on his hand were the key to unlocking the truth. My resolve hardened. This was just the beginning. The colleague's resentment had been a palpable thing, a bitter taste lingering in the air long after I'd left her office. It was a potent fuel, capable of driving someone to extreme measures, and it added a new, unsettling dimension to Thorne's demise. The pieces were shifting, but the picture they formed remained frustratingly incomplete, shrouded in the corporate secrets and academic rivalries I now knew defined Thorne's world. I needed more than motive, I needed the method. The proof, and I suspected it lay hidden within the labyrinthine digital fortress Thorne had built around his life's work. The university's internal security officer, a stocky man with a perpetually furrowed brow, had granted me access to Thorne's primary workstation and the lab's central server rack. "Everything's logged, investigator," he'd grumbled, his eyes darting to the surveillance camera in the corner. "Every keystroke, every file accessed." "Good. That's exactly what I need." The officer retreated, leaving me in the quiet hum of the machinery. I settled into Thorne's ergonomic chair, its leather still cool from disuse. My fingers danced over the keyboard, bypassing the initial login with a forensic toolkit. The system was robust, layers of encryption and biometric locks, but nothing was truly impenetrable. Not when you knew where to look for the cracks. Hours blurred into a focused trance. I delved into the network logs, the file directories, the backup archives. Thorne had been meticulous, almost obsessive, in his data organization. Project files were categorized by a complex alphanumeric system, each subfolder protected by additional layers. His groundbreaking research, I knew, involved advanced genetic sequencing, a field poised to revolutionize medicine or, in the wrong hands, unleash unimaginable threats. The very concept sent a shiver down my spine, a chilling reminder of the stakes involved. Then I found it. A ghost in the machine. Timestamp discrepancies, subtle alterations in file metadata, and a sequence of commands that indicated a systematic attempt to manipulate and then purge specific datasets. The target, Project Chimera, one of Thorne's most highly classified initiatives. The wipe wasn't complete. A forensic recovery tool, meticulously applied, began to reconstruct fragments. What emerged were corrupted but identifiable file headers, indicating genetic sequences, experimental data logs, and research notes. The sheer volume suggested a significant portion of Thorne's most sensitive work had been targeted. This wasn't just an attempt to hide a mistake, it was an attempt to erase a narrative. My internal thoughts raced. Who had the skill, the access, and the motive to execute such a precise digital attack? Was it an external party, a shadowy corporate rival perhaps, trying to steal Thorne's research or bury its implications? Or was it Thorne himself, attempting to cover his own tracks, perhaps driven by the paranoia Maya had mentioned? Speaking of Maya, I found her in a quiet corner of the administrative offices, hunched over a keyboard, her shoulders drawn tight. She jumped when I approached, a startled rabbit caught in the open. Maya, I began, keeping my voice even. I need to ask you a few more questions about Thorne's research, specifically Project Chimera. She flinched at the project name. I don't know much about that. Thorne kept it very private. Did he ever mention anyone else having access to those specific files? I pressed, watching her carefully. Or any unusual activity on his network? She wrung her hands, her gaze flickering to the closed office doors around us. He was different, lately. Jumpy. He started saying things about being watched. About his work being twisted. He said people would do anything to get their hands on it, or to stop it. She paused, her voice dropping lower. He talked about precautions, about making sure certain data would never see the light of day. But he also said he felt like he was being cornered. Cornered by whom? She shook her head, a tremor running through her. He never said. Just them. He was paranoid, investigator. Truly paranoid. Her words echoed the digital breadcrumbs I'd just unearthed. Paranoia, the desire to hide something, and a systematic data wipe. The two narratives, digital and human, were beginning to align, but the conclusion was still elusive. Was Thorne covering for himself, or was someone else exploiting his paranoia? Perhaps even orchestrating it? The attempted data wipe pointed to a deliberate act, not a random accident. The implications of Thorne's research, particularly Project Chimera, resonated with Maya's fear. If it truly had applications in global health or bioweaponry, the stakes were astronomical. Someone desperately wanted that information gone. I left Maya, her fear a tangible presence in the quiet office. My mind kept returning to the corrupted files, the ghost of Project Chimera. The wiped data felt like a key, but to what lock? I needed to find a physical counterpart, something tangible that the digital records had tried to erase. Something that might have been moved, stored, or even disposed of. It was an unusual lead, but the digital traces had hinted at transfers of biological material, not just data, associated with Project Chimera. If Thorne was dealing with advanced genetic sequences, it stood to reason he might have required access to specific tissue samples or even full anatomical specimens. The facility, a sprawling, climate-controlled complex beneath the main medical school building, was the only place on campus equipped for such storage and study. It was a long shot, but the kind of precise, almost surgical data manipulation I'd witnessed suggested an equally precise physical cover-up. I had to check. The sterile hum of the spectral analyzer was a familiar counterpoint to the quiet thrum of my own focus. This particular lab, tucked away behind several reinforced doors, housed some of the most advanced material science equipment on the continent, a testament to the university's commitment to forensic research. My eyes were glued to the monitor, a kaleidoscope of peaks and valleys charting the elemental composition of the microscopic residue I'd painstakingly collected from Thorne's lab. It was the unusual burn pattern, the anomaly that had snagged my attention amidst the chaos of the scene. The sample, barely visible to the naked eye, was now magnified thousands of times, its atomic structure being meticulously deconstructed. Hours blurred. The spectral lines danced across the screen, each one a signature, a fingerprint of an element. Most were common, expected in a high-tech bioengineering environment. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, the building blocks of life and organic compounds. These weren't random. They pointed to something synthetic, something complex. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing the unique spectral signature against a global database of known materials. The database word, processing billions of data points. My breath hitched as the results began to populate the screen. The match wasn't immediate, nor was it simple. It was a composite, a unique blend. The system flagged it as a rare, synthetic polymer. The description that followed was a revelation. Polymer 734 alpha, a highly durable, temperature-resistant composite, primarily used in specialized high-end industrial applications requiring extreme chemical inertness and structural integrity. Industrial applications. Not academic. Not typically found in a bioengineering lab, even one as cutting-edge as Thorne's. This wasn't a standard lab material. This was something engineered for heavy-duty, demanding environments, far removed from delicate biological experiments. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Thorne's research, while groundbreaking, had always been rumored to have significant industrial implications. He wasn't just working in a vacuum, he had funding, corporate backing. And one name immediately surfaced, Omnicorp. They were a behemoth, a conglomerate with a history of aggressive R&D, known for acquiring promising technologies and integrating them into their vast industrial empire. Their fingerprints were all over the funding proposals I'd reviewed, their name a persistent shadow in Thorne's financial records. This polymer, 734 alpha, was a critical piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a trace element, it was an active participant in the destruction, an accelerant or a component of the device that caused the specific burn pattern. It suggested a level of sophisticated planning and access to specialized materials that went far beyond what a lone academic could easily acquire. This wasn't a lab accident. This was a targeted, professional operation. I picked up my secure comms device. "I need to speak with the Omnicorp liaison," I told the officer on the other end. Immediately. The meeting was arranged for later that afternoon at Omnicorp's downtown corporate offices. The liaison, a man in a precisely tailored suit with an unervingly smooth smile, met me in a minimalist conference room overlooking the city. His name tag simply read Corporate Relations. I didn't catch his actual name, nor did he offer it. He gestured to a seat, his movements fluid, almost practiced. "Reed," he began, his voice calm, "thank you for coming. We've been following the unfortunate news regarding Dr. Thorne. Thorne's work, specifically his connections to Omnicorp," I stated, cutting to the chase. "We've found a unique material at the scene. A synthetic polymer, 734 alpha. The liaison's smile didn't falter, but a flicker, a micro-expression of surprise, ghosted across his eyes before his composure snapped back into place. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. 734 alpha, you say? Interesting. Omnicorp works with a vast array of materials, naturally, given our diverse industrial portfolio. We believe it played a role in the incident. I see, he murmured, his gaze distant for a moment, as if sifting through an internal database. Well, Dr. Thorne was indeed engaged in some groundbreaking work that had potential industrial applications, particularly in advanced material synthesis. Omnicorp funded several of his projects, always with an eye towards future innovation. He paused, then continued, it's entirely plausible that some of our proprietary materials might have been introduced into his lab for testing purposes, under strict non-disclosure agreements, of course. We often collaborate on such experimental fronts. His explanation was too smooth, too ready. Overly cooperative. He was giving me an answer before I'd fully asked the question, a tell that always put me on edge. Proprietary materials? I asked, raising an eyebrow. So, Omnicorp has exclusive access to 734 Alpha? Among others, yes, he confirmed, his smile widening almost imperceptibly. It's part of our competitive edge. Our R&D department is quite robust. And who within Omnicorp would have authorized the transfer of 734 Alpha to Thorne's lab? He chuckled, a soft, dismissive sound. That would be a lengthy list, I'm afraid. Our internal processes are quite decentralized when it comes to early-stage research partnerships. Many hands touch these projects. But rest assured, Reed, Omnicorp is fully committed to assisting your investigation. We have nothing to hide. Dr. Nothing to hide, yet every answer was carefully constructed, every detail just vague enough to deflect further inquiry. The web of connections was tightening, but instead of clarity, I felt a deepening sense of unease. Omnicorp wasn't just a funder, they were inextricably linked, and the liaison's evasiveness only confirmed my suspicion that the answers I sought were buried deep within their corporate structure. The polymer residue was a stubborn ghost. This wasn't off-the-shelf material. My analysis had narrowed it down to a class of high-temperature resistant, low-friction polymers, often used in specialized industrial applications or, more interestingly, advanced propulsion systems and high-end protective coatings. I spent the better part of the morning in my personal lab, a space where the air hummed with the quiet thrum of analytical instruments. My fingers traced the cold steel of the scanning electron microscope. The image on the screen showed the polymer's intricate lattice, unmistakable. I ran a cross-reference through a secure database, one typically reserved for government contractors and high-tech manufacturers. The search was slow, sifting through proprietary compounds, patented formulations. Each failed match tightened the knot in my stomach. Someone had gone to great lengths to source this. A sharp rap on the door pulled me away from the glowing screen. It was a colleague, the senior analyst from the materials division, his face etched with the usual blend of curiosity and professional caution. Reed, the director wants an update on the Thorne case. And there's a package for you. Came through special delivery. He handed me a padded envelope, unmarked save for my name typed neatly on a label. Thanks, I said, my gaze already back on the screen. The package felt light, innocuous. I slid it open with a scalpel, revealing a standard data stick, the kind used for large file transfers. No label, no sender. My internal alarm bells began to chime. I inserted it into a standalone terminal, one disconnected from the main network. A single file appeared, a schematic diagram, intricately detailed, of a high-pressure containment vessel. It was Thorne's design, but with a subtle modification, an additional port, precisely where the polymer residue had been found. It was a pressure release valve, but designed to fail under specific conditions. And the schematics were dated just weeks before Thorne's death. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate sabotage. The air in my lab suddenly felt colder. I detached the data stick, slipped it into an evidence bag, and locked it in my secure safe. The director could wait. This was more urgent. It was an unusual detour, but I had a hunch. Thorne, despite his advanced bioengineering work, had a history of consulting on anatomical preservation techniques. I wanted to see if any of his experimental materials, even inert ones, might have found their way into a mundane storage environment, perhaps as a test bed for a new coating or sealant. It was a long shot, but I was out of other avenues for the polymer. The drive was uneventful until I reached the main intersection leading to the facility. Tires shrieked, a blur of black metal flashed in my peripheral vision. I stomped on the brake, my vehicle juddering violently, the seatbelt biting into my shoulder. The sedan didn't slow, didn't acknowledge, just sped through the intersection, disappearing around the corner. Too close. Too deliberate. No hesitation, no attempt to correct. It felt less like a mistake and more like a warning. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The facility was a stark, utilitarian building, tucked away behind the main campus. Inside, the air was cool, sterile, smelling faintly of formaldehyde and ozone. A facility manager, a stoic woman with a clipboard, directed me to the storage bays. My search yielded nothing relevant. No unusual coatings, no experimental sealants, just the expected preservation methods. The polymer was not here. Frustration simmered, but the incident with the sedan had etched a new layer of unease onto my determination. I returned to my personal lab, the quiet hum of familiar comfort. But as I pushed open the door, a subtle shift in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible scent, not chemicals, but something metallic, like ozone after a spark, prickled at my senses. I ran a practiced eye over my workspace. Nothing overtly disturbed. My microscope was exactly where I'd left it, the monitor still displaying the polymer's image. My secure safe was untouched. Then I saw it. A minuscule scratch on the polished chrome casing of my mass spectrometer, near the sample tray. It was thin, barely a hair's width, but unmistakably fresh, almost invisible against the reflective surface. It wasn't there when I left. Someone had been in my lab. Someone had been looking at my instruments, perhaps even attempting to access them. They hadn't tried to break the safe, hadn't left a mess. They were precise, professional, and silent. The subtle breach was far more unsettling than a smashed lock. They wanted me to know they could get in. This wasn't just a corporate cover-up anymore. This was a direct threat. My investigation was making someone very nervous. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something urged me to answer. "Read," I stated, my voice even. "It's Maya," a hushed voice replied, laced with a tremor I immediately recognized as fear. I need to talk to you. By the river. In 20 minutes. Please. Alone." The line went dead before I could ask another question. I drove through the city, the streetlights painting streaks across my windshield. The diner was a relic, neon sign flickering, casting a garish glow on the wet pavement. Maya was already there, huddled in a booth at the back, a half-empty cup of tea steaming in front of her. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for coming," she breathed, her voice still barely audible. She didn't meet my gaze directly, instead staring into her teacup as if it held all the answers. I know I shouldn't have said anything before. I was terrified. Terrified of what, Maya? I pressed gently. She took a shaky breath. Of them. Of what they could do. After Thorne. After his death, I just wanted to disappear. She finally looked at me, her eyes brimming. But I saw something. The week before. The week before he died. Late one night. I was working late, trying to finalize some reports for the project. I saw someone. Not Thorne. Someone else, in his lab. My pulse quickened. Who? Past midnight. I was leaving, and the main lab door was ajar, just a sliver. I saw a figure inside. Tall. They were at Thorne's main console, silhouetted against the monitors. I thought it was Thorne at first, but the way they moved. Too quick, too furtive. Not his usual slow, deliberate movements. I don't know. I just knew it wasn't right. The next morning, I asked Thorne if he'd been working late with someone, and he just told me to mind my own business, that his work was confidential. He'd never spoken to me like that before. He was usually so patient. Her voice cracked. I didn't think anything of it then, not really. Just that he was stressed. But after what happened? I keep seeing that figure. The pieces clicked into place. The polymer, the modified schematic, the near miss, the subtle breach of my lab. And now, Maya's terrified confession. An unknown individual, accessing Thorne's lab late at night, just days before his death, making a subtle modification, leaving a trace of a unique polymer. The web of connections was no longer tightening, it was constricting, pulling me deeper into a dangerous current. The first threat had been delivered. It clung to my clothes, seeped into my skin, a stark reminder of finality. I was not here for the cadavers themselves, but for a secure terminal nestled in a small, windowless office tucked away in a rarely used section of the facility. Its isolation was its appeal, no prying eyes, no casual conversations. Just me and the data. I hunched over the screen, fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up the environmental logs from Thorne's lab. The colleague's terrified confession from the previous night still echoed in my ears, an unknown individual, a late-night breach, a subtle modification. The unique polymer trace I'd found earlier now had context. It was a thread, thin but strong, leading into the labyrinth of digital records. Every atmospheric variable, every equipment calibration, every access attempt was meticulously logged. I started with the hours leading up to the incident, then expanded the search, pushing back days, weeks. My eyes scanned lines of code, timestamps, sensor readings, a digital archaeology project. Most of it was mundane, the rhythmic hum of a highly controlled research environment. Then, a flicker. 3 days before the incident. A spike in the ambient carbon readings, brief and immediately corrected by the automated ventilation system. I flagged it. An anomaly, but easily dismissed as a sensor glitch or a momentary system hiccup. Then, a few hours later, a minute, almost imperceptible dip in the oxygen saturation in sector gamma, where Thorne had been. Working. Again, corrected. Too subtle to trigger an alarm, too small to be noticed by anyone not looking for it with a microscope and a motive. My gut tightened. This wasn't random. I correlated these digital whispers with the physical evidence. The specific burn pattern on Thorne's workbench, which had initially been attributed to an uncontrolled reaction. The scorch marks on the ceiling, too high to be from a simple lab accident. The peculiar residue I'd scraped from the exhaust vent, a complex polymer compound, matching the trace I'd found near the access panel. It was all starting to coalesce. The saboteur hadn't just caused an accident, they had engineered one. I pulled up the schematics for Thorne's bespoke atmospheric regulators, cross-referencing them with the system logs. There it was. Not a brute force hack, but a sophisticated manipulation of existing protocols. Someone had accessed the system, not to crash it, but to reprogram its response to specific environmental triggers. First, a small release of a gas, perhaps the very polymer I'd found, designed to subtly alter the atmospheric composition in sector gamma. The carbon spike, the oxygen dip, these weren't malfunctions, they were tests. The saboteur was calibrating the lab's automated response, learning its rhythm, understanding its thresholds. They were teaching the system to lie. Then came the main event. At the precise moment Thorne was engrossed in his work, focused on the delicate interplay of his experimental compounds, the system was triggered. Not a sudden explosion, but a controlled cascade. The environmental controls, having been pre-programmed, would have failed to correct a critical atmospheric imbalance. The burn patterns, the residue, they were not from a single, catastrophic event, but from a carefully orchestrated series of small, rapid ignitions, designed to mimic a runaway reaction. It was brilliant in its depravity. The system would report everything as normal, even as it facilitated Thorne's demise. The lab's own safeguards turned into weapons. The remote trigger, I surmised, would have been timed to coincide with Thorne's most sensitive experimental phase, when he would be least likely to notice subtle environmental shifts, his focus entirely on the delicate balance before him. I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. The air in the office suddenly felt heavier, the formaldehyde scent more acrid. This wasn't just murder, it was an execution by proxy, using Thorne's own sanctuary against him. The perpetrator hadn't needed to be physically present at the moment of death. They had simply set the stage, programmed the script, and watched it unfold from afar. This was someone who knew Thorne's lab better than I knew the back of my hand. Someone who understood the nuances of his experiments, the very gases and polymers he worked with, enough to weaponize them. The accident was a masterpiece of deception, designed to leave no trace of human intervention, only the illusion of a brilliant mind's fatal misstep. I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing it. The subtle shift in air, the growing heat, Thorne's dawning realization as his carefully controlled environment turned hostile. The saboteur had played God, and Thorne had been the sacrifice. My jaw tightened. I watched the assistant carefully replace the sheet over Thorne's body, the last of the external examination complete. My earlier hypothesis, the one about the subtle burn patterns and the microscopic residue, still held true. Thorne's death wasn't an accident. It was too precise, too elaborate. The killer didn't just want Thorne dead, they wanted his work erased or, more likely, completely controlled. No, the complexity spoke volumes. It spoke of a motive beyond profit. It spoke of prevention. Someone wanted to stop Thorne from completing something, or, perhaps more critically, from releasing something. My breath plumed briefly in the frigid space. "Thank you for your thoroughness," I said to the assistant, my voice tight. "I'll be reviewing the preliminary reports later this afternoon." He nodded, already moving on to log the next incoming case. I walked out, shedding the sterile gown and gloves, the scent of antiseptic following me. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Thorne was a brilliant man, but also known for his fierce ethical stance. What if his final project wasn't just groundbreaking, but also morally contentious to a powerful entity? And what if he was about to blow the whistle? I headed straight back to the research facility, navigating the labyrinthine corridors. The facility was still under lockdown, a skeletal crew of security personnel patrolling the perimeters. I flashed my badge at the guard at the main entrance, a burly man with a perpetually tired expression. He waved me through without a word. A senior investigator from the regional task force was already there, sifting through physical documents. He looked up, his brow furrowed. "Anything new, Reed?" the senior investigator asked, gesturing vaguely at a stack of schematics. "A theory," I replied, moving towards Thorne's workstation. "The method of death, it's too intricate for a simple hit. It points to a motive of prevention, not just acquisition. I need to get into Thorne's digital files. Specifically, his research logs." The senior investigator sighed. "We've tried. His system is locked down tighter than a vault. Our IT technician couldn't crack it without wiping the drives, and we're not authorized for that yet." "I don't need to wipe anything," I said, pulling a specialized data retrieval device from my kit. "I need access." Thorne was meticulous. If he had concerns, they'd be documented. I sat down at Thorne's desk, the cold plastic of the keyboard cover a barrier between me and the secrets within. "Give me an hour." The senior investigator grunted, but didn't object. He returned to his paper shuffling, occasionally glancing my way. I connected my device to Thorne's main terminal. The interface was elegant, complex, designed by a mind that appreciated both function and security. Standard login attempts failed, as expected. I bypassed the conventional system, using a forensic exploit to delve into the raw data streams. It was like sifting through sand to find a specific grain of gold. Hours blurred. My fingers danced across the auxiliary keyboard, inputting sequences, monitoring data packets, looking for anomalies, for hidden partitions, for anything that didn't fit the expected structure of a cutting-edge research system. Then, a flicker. A section of the drive, small, cleverly disguised as corrupted system files, registered on my scanner. It wasn't just encrypted, it was buried, a digital ghost within the machine. Thorne had gone to extreme lengths to hide this. This was it. My heart gave a sharp, involuntary jolt against my ribs. I worked methodically, carefully, decrypting layer after layer. The process was agonizingly slow, each progress bar inching forward like a reluctant snail. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool air conditioning. The senior investigator, now leaning against the doorframe, watched me with a newfound intensity. Finally, the last barrier fell. A directory opened, revealing a single file, project_overview_ethics_v7.log. I clicked it open. The screen filled with Thorne's precise, academic prose, but the underlying emotion was palpable. He detailed his growing unease. He wrote of his initial excitement, then his dawning horror as he realized the potential for weaponization, not by him, but by those who sought to fund him. He explicitly mentioned Omnicorp, not as a direct funder of his public work, but as a clandestine backer of a separate, more dangerous project, one that twisted his core discoveries into something monstrous. The logs became more frantic. Thorne had discovered Omnicorp's intent to develop a bioweapon, a variant of his own benign research, designed for targeted demographic impact. He had been feeding them misleading data while secretly preparing a full dossier. He intended to expose them, to leak everything to the global scientific community and regulatory bodies. The date of his planned exposé was just 2 days after his death. I leaned back in the chair, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. This wasn't about stealing Thorne's research. It was about preventing its release. It was about silencing him before he could expose a corporate conspiracy of unimaginable scale. The complexity of the murder, the elaborate cover-up, it wasn't just to hide a killer, but to bury a truth. The stakes had just skyrocketed. This wasn't just a murder investigation anymore. The terminal's interface, elegant and complex as it was, presented a formidable wall. Standard login attempts failed, just as I'd anticipated. But meticulousness often leaves behind traces, a digital breadcrumb trail. I connected my forensic suite, a compact device humming with custom algorithms designed to probe and exploit. Hours blurred. The senior investigator had long since retreated to his own tasks, the occasional rustle of paper or a low sigh the only sounds besides the software of my equipment. I wasn't trying to brute force the system, that was too crude, too noisy. Instead, I was looking for a backdoor, a maintenance port, anything Thorne might have forgotten to patch or an old, deprecated protocol still active. His system was layered, like an archaeological dig, each stratum representing a different security update or a new iteration of his research. I worked my way through, mapping the architecture, identifying vulnerabilities. Then, a flicker. Not a direct access, but a gateway. An obscure, rarely used diagnostic utility, likely forgotten in a rush to deploy a new security patch. It was a narrow aperture, but enough. I injected a custom script, a digital skeleton key, and watched as the system reluctantly yielded. The main dashboard bloomed into view, a torrent of data cascading across the screen. Access logs were my first priority. Who came and went, when, and from what terminals? I cross-referenced these with project manifests, communication records, and the internal employee database. Most were automated system checks or routine maintenance. I filtered the entries, focusing on individuals with the highest clearance levels, those who would have access to the specific research zone where Thorne met his end. The list shrank from dozens to a mere handful. Next, I overlaid this with the technical expertise required to execute the kind of sophisticated sabotage I now suspected. This wasn't a simple bomb or a tripped wire. It required an intimate understanding of Thorne's specific experimental protocols, the tolerances of his equipment, and the precise sequence of events that would lead to a catastrophic failure without immediately pointing to external interference. My algorithms crunched the data, correlating skill sets listed in employee profiles with the unique demands of Thorne's final project. Most of the names on the narrowed list were highly qualified research associates, specialists in their fields, but none possessed the peculiar blend of theoretical knowledge and practical, hands-on experience with the specific, proprietary systems Thorne had developed. Then, one profile flared. David Thorne, no relation, the database confirmed, from Omnicorp, the primary funding partner. His access privileges were surprisingly broad, granted under the guise of project oversight and resource allocation. His digital footprint within the system was extensive, far beyond what a typical corporate oversight role would necessitate. He'd access deep-level schematics, experimental parameters, and even early-stage design documents. I clicked deeper into his profile, past the corporate pleasantries and standard qualifications. A small, almost hidden section, flagged by an internal security alert from years ago, caught my eye. It was an archived report, detailing a past internal investigation at Omnicorp, a scandal involving stolen intellectual property. The report mentioned David Thorne's name, not as a suspect, but as a key figure in the recovery operation. He had, the report vaguely stated, a unique background in covert operations that made him ideal for sensitive asset retrieval. My fingers paused over the trackpad. Covert operations. Asset retrieval. The phrases hung in the air, heavy with implication. This wasn't a standard corporate executive. This was someone trained to operate in shadows, to retrieve what was considered valuable, by any means necessary. And a past scandal involving stolen intellectual property? Thorne's research was world-changing, incredibly valuable. The pieces began to slot together with chilling precision. The meticulous burn pattern, the microscopic trace of an unusual catalyst, the way the accident had unfolded, it all screamed calculated precision, not random chance. Someone with an intimate knowledge of Thorne's work, yes, but also someone with the expertise to execute a flawless, untraceable act. An inside man. And David Thorne, the Omnicorp liaison, fit that description with terrifying accuracy. His background wasn't just technical, it was operational. He could understand the science and then execute the plan to perfection, making it look like an accident. This wasn't just about corporate espionage anymore. And the killer was someone who could slip in and out, leaving no obvious trace, someone who knew the system inside and out. I printed out the relevant sections of David Thorne's profile, the archived report, and the access logs. The senior investigator looked up, his brow furrowed. I didn't say anything, just collected my gear. There were physical records, older project files, perhaps even a hard copy of that internal Omnicorp report, that wouldn't be on Thorne's digital system. Thorne had been old school enough to keep backups, to have redundant archives. Some of his earliest, most foundational work, the kind that might hint at a long-standing rivalry or a deeper motive for theft, would likely be housed in the university's central archives. And the most secure, least trafficked archive on campus, the one used for sensitive, non-digital materials that needed to be kept out of sight? I knew exactly where I needed to go. It was an unlikely place for corporate secrets, a place overlooked by almost everyone, yet perfectly suited for storing physical documents that needed absolute discretion and minimal foot traffic. A place where the dead kept the living secrets. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a frisson of tension that sharpened my resolve. The air in my lungs felt like chilled iron. I watched the clock tick, each second a deliberate hammer blow against the silence of the surveillance van. My staged phone call, a carefully crafted performance for the ears of a particular Omnicorp junior executive I knew had direct ties to Aris Thorne's brother, had been broadcast a mere 4 hours ago. I'd spoken of a stabilization matrix signature, a unique biomarker Aris had been on the verge of isolating, one that would definitively expose the true nature of his final project. It was a lie, of course, but a precise one, designed to resonate only with someone who understood the specific, devastating implications of Aris's work. Now, I waited. My colleague, a lanky analyst whose focus was usually buried in data streams, sat beside me, his gaze fixed on the monitors displaying grainy, infrared feeds of the facility's perimeter. The facility itself was a hulking, brutalist structure on the edge of the university campus, far from the bustling main quadrangles. No one would question why sensitive biological material might be stored there, especially something as volatile as Aris's research. Movement, the analyst murmured, pointing to a screen. The driver, a figure I instantly recognized from security footage from Aris's lab, exited the vehicle. David. Aris Thorne's brother. The executive. He moved with a practiced economy, a ghost in the pre-dawn gloom. My gut tightened. The bait had been taken. I gave the signal. Stay here. Maintain visual. If he gets past me, you move in. Slipping out of the van, I moved silently towards the facility's rear entrance, a service door I'd ensured was discreetly compromised. My hand rested on the grip of my sidearm, a familiar weight. The executive was already inside, navigating the echoing corridors. I followed, my footsteps muffled by the industrial linoleum. Rows of stainless steel doors lined the long, narrow hallways, each one a sealed vault. The air was frigid, carrying the faint, antiseptic tang of formaldehyde. My breath plumed in front of me. I could hear the executive's footsteps ahead, quicker now, betraying a rising urgency. He was heading for the main storage area, where I'd implied the sample was kept. He was there, fumbling with a digital lock on one of the larger storage units, his back to me. He froze, his shoulders tensing. He slowly turned, his face a mask of carefully constructed surprise that crumbled at the edges. His eyes, usually cool and calculating, flickered with a raw, desperate fear. "Read." "What?" "What are you doing here?" he stammered, his hand instinctively dropping the device. "I could ask you the same question," I countered, stepping fully into the dim light, my presence undeniable. "This isn't exactly Omnicorp's RAN D wing. And that's not standard issue equipment for a corporate executive." He tried to recover, a strained smile pulling at his lips. "Just curious. I'd heard rumors about Aris's final project. Wanted to see if there was any truth to them. Rumors about a stabilization matrix signature that would expose Omnicorp's unethical bioweapon development?" I pressed, watching his face closely. The name of the bioweapon hit him like a physical blow. His composure shattered. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snarled, his voice losing its forced calm. Aris was unstable. His research was dangerous. A rogue element. Dangerous, perhaps, I conceded, but not unstable. And not a rogue element. He was threatening to expose your rogue element, wasn't he? He knew he was trapped. I pulled a small, clear evidence bag from my jacket pocket. Inside, a microscopic fragment shimmered. "This is a trace polymer," I explained, holding it up. "Unique. Like the clean room in Aris's lab. And, coincidentally, at 2 other accident scenes I investigated recently. Scenes where individuals who were getting too close to Aris's work met with unfortunate ends." his gaze fixed on the polymer, a dawning horror on his face. He knew exactly what it was. The same material that would have been transferred from his gloves, his tools, to the scene of each accident. "You missed a spot, David," I stated, my voice devoid of accusation, simply stating fact. A single, microscopic particle, caught in the weave of Aris's lab coat, preserved despite the inferno. And another, on the rim of a coffee cup at the first accident scene. And a third, embedded in the sole of a shoe at the second. He crumpled against the stainless steel door, the fight draining from him. The sterile, freezing air seemed to press down, suffocating him. They were developing a bioweapon, a targeted pathogen. Aris. He discovered it. He was going to leak everything. Expose them. They told me to stop him. To make it look like an accident. My family. The pieces clicked into place, forming a grim, complete picture. He didn't resist. His brother's name, whispered from my lips, had been the final key, unlocking a dam of desperate compliance. The two operatives, their faces grim and unyielding, moved with practiced efficiency. David's hands were secured behind his back, the click of the restraints echoing in the sterile silence of the abandoned factory. "He'll talk," I told the lead operative, watching David being escorted out. My voice was rough, a testament to the sleepless nights and the grim discoveries. "He has to." The unraveling was swift, brutal. David Thorne's testimony, broken and fragmented at first, then flowing with a torrent of coerced admissions, painted a damning portrait. He hadn't killed Aris. He had been a pawn, manipulated and threatened by forces within Omnicorp to sabotage his brother's research, to ensure Aris never brought his findings to light independently. That accident was a staged event, a desperate attempt to cover a theft that went horribly wrong. Aris had resisted, had fought back, and in the struggle, a failsafe had been triggered, a desperate measure to destroy his life's work rather than let it fall into the wrong hands. The killer, David revealed, was not just an operative, it was the head of Omnicorp's internal security, acting on direct orders from the highest echelons of the corporation. The news hit like a seismic shockwave. Within hours, the security chief was apprehended, his attempts to flee thwarted by a coordinated interagency dragnet. The legal counsel, implicated by David's detailed accounts of threats and intimidation, was next. Then came the chairman of the board, his penthouse apartment raided at dawn, the images flashing across every screen. The public, initially consumed by the tragedy of a brilliant mind lost, was now gripped by a different kind of horror, the ruthless machinations of corporate power, the silencing of innovation for profit. My phone buzzed relentlessly with updates, each call a new thread pulled from the tangled web. The lead investigator kept me informed, his voice strained but triumphant. "It's bigger than we thought, Reed. Much bigger. Aris's research, designed to revolutionize biological regeneration, was a double-edged sword. In the wrong hands, it could be devastating." That afternoon, a call came through from an unfamiliar number. It was the director of a clandestine government agency, his tone grave. "We need you, Reed. There's one last piece. Aris Thorne had a contingency. A backup." The location was a stark, windowless building tucked away on the far edge of the sprawling university campus. The air inside was heavy with the scent of preservatives and an unsettling stillness. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on rows of stainless steel gurneys, each draped in white sheeting. The director met me there, flanked by 2 armed operatives and a data analyst. Aris was meticulous, the director explained, his breath visible in the frigid air. He knew the risks. David, under duress, was supposed to move this. But he never got the chance. Our intelligence suggests Aris, anticipating betrayal, had already secured it here, disguised as biological waste samples. The analyst, gloved and masked, carefully extracted a series of sealed, cryogenically preserved vials in a small, hardened data drive, meticulously labeled with a seemingly innocuous code. It was a masterstroke of misdirection. This was it, the culmination of Aris Thorne's life, the raw, unadulterated research that Omnicorp had been willing to kill for. As the analyst worked, transferring the data to a secure server, I felt the weight of it all. The public outcry was deafening. News channels ran continuous loops of Omnicorp executives being led away in handcuffs, juxtaposed with images of Aris Thorne, smiling and vibrant in old press photos. The ethical debate raged across every forum, the unchecked power of corporations, the moral boundaries of scientific advancement, the responsibility of genius. Governments, both domestic and international, were already clamoring for control of Aris's research. The director made it clear this wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about global security. The future of Aris Thorne's work, a project that promised to rewrite the very definition of life, hung in a precarious balance, a prize coveted by nations and agencies alike. Now, it just felt like a cold, unyielding truth. I stood beside a stainless steel gurney, its surface reflecting the harsh overhead fluorescence, watching a forensic technician carefully, almost reverently, handle the cryovials. "This is it, Reed," the technician's voice was muffled by his mask, a low hum in the cavernous room. He held up one vial, its liquid contents swirling faintly. The final sample. The one Thorne called Phoenix. Phoenix. A rebirth. A resurrection. The name itself was a twisted irony, given the circumstances of its creator's end. My mind replayed the images of Thorne's lab, the devastation, the meticulous, almost surgical destruction meant to obscure everything, but not everything. Not the microscopic traces, the unusual burn pattern that had first snagged my attention, the anomalies that whispered of deliberate intent rather than accident. The data drive, recovered alongside the vials, had been decrypted hours ago. The analyst, a quiet woman with eyes that missed nothing, had shown me the schematics, the intricate biological pathways, the projected outcomes. It wasn't a bioweapon, not in the traditional sense. It was something far more insidious, far more tempting to the wrong hands. Thorne hadn't been trying to destroy life, he'd been trying to redefine it. The data revealed a process, a genetic sequence, capable of radically accelerating cellular regeneration and adaptation. Not just healing, but evolution. Targeted, controlled evolution. Imagine the implications: immunity to all known diseases, enhanced physical and cognitive capabilities, perhaps even extended lifespans. It was a godlike power, distilled into a few milliliters of fluid. The killer, the ambitious research director from a rival institution, hadn't wanted to stop Thorne. He had wanted to possess Thorne's work. He'd seen the potential, the unimaginable wealth and power that would come from controlling such a breakthrough. He hadn't just stolen the research, he'd tried to steal the future. The final, damning evidence had been a microscopic residue of a novel catalyst, a compound only the killer had access to, found embedded in a fragment of the lab's ventilation system, meticulously wiped from every other surface. I thought of Thorne, a man so consumed by his vision that he'd failed to see the viper in his own garden. He'd pushed the boundaries of what was possible, but he'd forgotten the boundaries of human morality. The technician carefully placed the vial into a shielded container. The samples go to a secure government facility. Under lock and key, indefinitely. The data drive too. No one touches this without multiple layers of clearance, oversight committees, and international agreements. It's too dangerous. Too dangerous. A simple phrase, yet it encapsulated the entire tragedy. Thorne's ambition, his genius, had unearthed a power that humanity wasn't ready for, perhaps would never be. The research director had merely been the first, most immediate manifestation of that danger. There would be others. Always others. I didn't just solve murders, I peeled back layers of human ambition, greed, and the terrifying potential of unchecked intellect. Each case left its mark, a faint scar on the landscape of my own understanding. Thorne's case had been particularly brutal, not for the gore, but for the profound betrayal it represented. A betrayal of trust, of scientific integrity, of the very notion of progress for the greater good. It was a stark reminder that the most dangerous discoveries weren't always weapons, but ideas, concepts that could shatter the existing order. Good, I finally said, watching the technician seal the container. That's where it belongs. The immediate threat was neutralized. The killer was apprehended, his motives laid bare, his attempt to weaponize Thorne's brilliance thwarted. Thorne, for all his flaws, had been afforded a measure of justice. His life's work, though perilous, would not fall into the hands of those who sought to exploit it. Not yet, anyway. I turned away from the gurney, the scent of formaldehyde clinging to my clothes. My commitment to forensic justice had never wavered, but each investigation deepened my understanding of the cost. The truth, in all its stark, unvarnished glory, was often heavy, a burden carried long after the reports were filed and the convictions secured. Thorne's case was closed, a grim chapter brought to its conclusion. But the struggle between progress and peril, between ambition and ethics, was an endless one.